Hey, buddy, watch this.
Hello, Regis Gilbin is the name and Hearthstone is the game, and I want to talk about some potential designs for the new Zul'jin hero card that we're going to get in Rastakhan's Rumble. If you didn't know, it's already been confirmed that Hunter is getting a hero card. We know the troll champion for Hunter is Zul'jin, so it's all lining up, and we have some descriptions and some ideas based on what Zul'jin has been in other games and in the past, what this card might look like. So I took my take on 5 different designs that you could see with Zul'jin. That said, let's go ahead and jump into them. Up first here, I have a hero card design that pulls really heavily from the old boss encounter of Zul'jin in World of Warcraft, where he would shift through these different forms. So to begin, it would be a 6-mana hero card. The battle cry would read, summon 2 Amani Berserkers. So much like you're progressing through a raid or a dungeon in World of Warcraft, you got to fight through the little stuff to get to the boss at the end. So you got a couple Amani Berserkers here in the way because he is an Amani troll. And, you know, they're not really worth 6 mana, so you're paying a little bit of a penalty here to develop your Death Knight and get some good hero powers in the future, but still able to do something the turn you play it. And then you start with a hero power here that's troll form, and then you'll move to bear form, eagle form, lynx form, and dragonhawk form, much like Zul'jin did in his old boss fight, but only after you satisfy a condition on each of these hero powers, which is that you have to take 10 damage. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to be at a negative 10 amount. This is not calculated like a Molten Giant, for instance, where you have to be 10 less than your maximum. It just means after you've taken 10 points of damage, you're going to shift into the next hero power. So you can heal that back up later, take another 10, and still shift into the next hero power. So things like armor or your total health, maximum health, don't really matter. It's just after you take 10 damage, you get a new hero power. So you start out with troll form, and this deals 1 damage to all minions. So this is very simply a whirlwind effect, and that's something Zul'jin had in troll form in his fight, but it also synergizes really well with the 2 Amani Berserkers that you're summoning when you play Warlord Zul'jin, because then you can whirlwind them and turn them into 5/2s instead of just 2/3s, also potentially cleaning up a little bit of your opponent's board. And this is a solid hero power. It's something we saw with Garrosh, the Death Knight, in the past. So you know this is a somewhat more powerful than expected hero power that could do a lot of work, but ultimately not probably the thing that you're super excited about that makes it the reason that you'd want to play a Death Knight, because it's really those very powerful repeated hero powers that make Death Knight so exciting. And that's where these following hero powers come in. So the idea is over the course of the game, you can start to manipulate your health, and your opponent can start to manipulate your health too, in ways to shift yourself into the next hero power, or maybe trying to stay in the current hero power you're at. For instance, if you're playing Odd Paladin, maybe troll form's the best hero power you're going to get, and you might try to actively avoid taking damage by playing taunts or making sure you resolve the board and clear minions. Alternatively, if you really like bear form instead, which would reduce the attack of all minions by 1, if you're thinking about stalling it out and playing it slower and just kind of freezing up your opponent's board by reducing their attack over multiple turns, then perhaps you need to shift into bear form and start executing that strategy. And then alternatively, your opponent might say, gosh, if I get a board of a bunch of 0 attack minions, thanks to bear form negating the attack of my guys, that's a problem. So I need to push him through bear form as quickly as possible. And I'm describing this in great detail, but essentially there's always this back and forth and this calculation that has to happen for both players on which hero power Zul'jin is in. And trying to force that or reserve a hero power becomes a really fun strategic element. So to quickly cover the remaining hero powers, after bear form, you go to eagle form, which summons 2 2/1 tornadoes with wind fury. So this is a really aggressive hero power that could build a lot of damage and could synergize with some neat things that Hunter might have access to, but ultimately is still fairly easily removed at 1 health. So if you're behind on the board, this isn't really a hero power that you're looking to get. Moving on to lynx form, this one you deal 10 damage to a random enemy. So this is a bit like the Ragnaros hero power you might see after completing the quest for warrior, but 10 damage instead of 8. Could be great to do a lot of face damage. It could also whiff if you constantly hit 1/1s, but generally a hero power that would be rather strong. And I should note too, each of these reflect that portion of the boss fight against Zul'jin. They do things that you would have seen in that same boss fight. These are all referencing. And then finally, Dragon Hawk form reads, all friendly characters have Wind Fury. As we've seen with Dragon Hawks in the past, they're all about Wind Fury. So I wanted to capture that. And this could be a great finishing hero power. It doesn't cost any mana or anything. Just all of your characters, including your hero, just always have Wind Fury. So if you have a big weapon, you might be able to attack for a ton of damage. If you can stabilize a minion or two, it's going to be huge hits. This just allows you all kinds of cool shenanigans if your deck supports it. But ultimately, maybe Lynx form is better. So you try to save enough health so that you don't shift into Dragonhawk form. And careful observers out there will note that the 4 of these hero powers combined to get to Dragonhawk form would require you to take 40 damage. And you might say, well, Regis, how can you take 40 damage? Well, you have to have some healing. If you want to survive through to Lynx form and Dragonhawk form, you'd have to heal a little bit of damage here and there, right? And that's not always easy for Hunter to do, so you'd have to build your deck in a careful way to get Lynx form actually satisfied, but certainly still possible. And that's what makes this cool. There are hero powers that do things in different directions. They are sometimes more aggressive, sometimes more defensive. And I like all that back and forth and all the strategic decision making and the complexity and the depth that a design like this offers. So I think this would be a pretty cool card to see. Moving on, let's look at a much, much simpler card. This version of Warlord Zul'jin would come in at 4 mana, and it would have a battle cry that reads, you can no longer equip weapons. So weapons are out of play with this Zul'jin, and the reason for that is because really your hero is becoming a weapon by default. Your hero power is now this thing that gives you a lot of attack, so you don't need a weapon, and in fact a weapon might make the hero power too good. And that hero power is Berserk. It's a passive hero power that simply reads, at the start of your turn, deal 1 damage to your hero, and then permanently gain +1 attack. So you take a little bit of damage. 1 damage is really pretty minimal, right? That's not something that you mind taking most of the time, but then you gain an attack. So you play this on turn 4, basically nothing happens, right? It's just awful. You basically just heal 5, you pass your turn, big sacrifice in tempo. But then you have this hero power that's gonna start building steam over time. And I tried to capture this idea of a Berserker. This is something you've seen with Zul'jin in past iterations of the character in other games, where you take damage and you gain attack. You take damage, you gain attack. It's that same Berserker enrage mentality, just stretched out over a longer time frame. So keep in mind, this Berserk hero power would be additive. It's permanently gain that attack. So going into turn 5, you'd gain 1 attack off of your Zul'jin. And you'd be able to ping something down, potentially just hit for the face, whatever it is. It's basically the druid hero power after 1 turn. But after 2 turns, you go to 2 attack, 3 turns, 3 attack, 4 turns, 4 attack, 5 turns, 5 attack. So if you played this on turn 4, on turn 9, you would just by default have 5 attack on your hero. On turn 10, 6 attack, etc., etc. And suddenly, 10 turns later, you've got this totally insane, overwhelming presence by using your hero to attack. And it might add up to a lot of damage. It's almost like accelerating as quickly as fatigue damage. But obviously, there is counterplay. Things like taunt, for instance, get in the way really quickly and slow you down. You're also just sacrificing a lot of tempo. That 1 turn pass on turn 4 against an aggro deck means you're just gonna lose the game. You also, don't forget, lose access to a normal hero power. Like, yes, this thing's happening passively, and it's better than a hero power, but you don't have that flexibility of spending that mana to influence your turn directly. So you're making some sacrifices. You're also just taking damage every turn. And after 10 turns, you've taken 10 free damage as well. And of course, the damage you take is less than the damage you're dealing, but there's, again, counterplay. There's things happening here. There's taunts. There's balancing acts. All of it matters. You have to attack face, or you have to trade into minions sometimes because you need to desperately clear. You're taking more damage. You're just risking your life. You're risking losing the game in a really big way for this potential swing later. And if your opponent times it well and they calculate the math and they play their taunts at the right time, you're just going to be absolutely helpless. So it's this balancing of a risk and reward. And I'll admit, I think you could probably tweak the numbers here a little bit. I went for more of a liberal approach, making it probably more powerful as opposed to less powerful. For instance, maybe you make Zul'jin 5 or 6 mana. Maybe you make him take 2 damage per turn to accelerate that risk he's acquiring a little bit. That's fine. Do whatever you want as far as the execution. I'm not a final designer. talking more about the idea, the theory, the mechanic here. If you want to tweak the numbers, share those in the comments. I'm sure you'll refine it to a point that makes sense. I'm okay with that. I think this wouldn't be totally insane, but if you wanted to make it a little slower, I don't blame you. Blizzard might do the very same. That said, though, I like the way this captures that Berserker ideal. I like the sense of impending doom where you have to act, you have to do something, or Zul'jin might just go absolutely nuts. I think that's a cool way to play, something Hunter would like particularly well as a damage class. Some of you are going to say that's too much damage. Yeah, maybe so. We'd see. But I like what this card does. Moving on to my third design for Zul'jin. With this one, I wanted to explore a little bit more of the mystical side of the card, because Blizzard in their description did tease that this hero might have more of a mystical, magical, spiritual element than past Hunter cards. So for the 7-mana Warlord Zul'jin, we have a battle cry here that reads, throw your weapon at all enemy minions, dealing its damage to each, and then you re-equip the weapon. So it's, you know, a pseudo Doomerang essentially built into Zul'jin, but it's an AoE Doomerang / Blade Flurry that gives you the weapon back. So it's potentially a really good board clear, right? Even just like, you know, an Eaglehorn Bow equipped, you deal 3 damage to all enemy minions, you clean up the board a little bit, and you get a new Eaglehorn Bow. So a battle cry that feels good when you have a weapon. Alternatively, a battle cry that feels terrible if you don't have a weapon. You don't do anything, right? If you don't have a weapon, your Zul'jin's an incredibly slow 7-mana play that feels like a big pass on the turn. So something that requires a little bit of setup and a certain way to build your deck specifically, but captures the idea of a throwing axe troll, which Zul'jin is. So I wanted to make sure I had at least one card that captured that aspect of him. And then moving on to the hero power here, this is where the mystical side of things comes in a little bit. It's Spirit of the Hunt, a 2-mana hero power that would allow you to discover an enemy minion that died this game, and then you'd summon a 1/1 copy of it. So the idea is you hunt down a minion, you kill your prey, and then because you're some mystical entity or you're borrowing some help from your Loa, you then perhaps capture the spirit of that enemy you hunted, or it's lingering around, and you pick that spirit out and you summon that spirit. So it would have the effects and the text and the death rattles and everything else, but it would only be a 1/1. So a bit like Silverhand Recruits, but occasionally Silverhand Recruits that have Lich King's effect or have Tyrion's effect. Whatever it might be, they have the potential to be really, really good, but still not incredibly consistent. So it's not like you're going to get a Lich King every single time for 2 mana. It's going to be a Discover. So depending on how many things you killed, you might not have a great choice at any given moment. And against aggro decks in particular, you might just get a bunch of minions without really any effect at all. So it's just as good as Silverhand Recruit and really worse in some ways, but the potential's there for it to do some cool things and create a lot of value and snowball into some nifty counters to, you know, big decks. Like a big priest deck would hate a hero power like this because you're just getting all these awesome effects for only 2 mana every turn. So I like that it exists as counterplay to some of those bigger, greedier game plans. Like imagine a Hadronox Druid playing against this. Oh my god, that might be terrible if you had the taunts to support it. So anyway, it captures that mystical side. It still plays into the hunter aspect of hunting down enemy minions and then turning them into something cool. And still a battle cry that makes this relevant. So more of a control or value type hero card that's maybe not as oppressive as Deathstalker Rex are, but puts a bit of a new flavor or spin on Hunter in a cool way. Moving on to my 4th design, I will admit this is the least inspired and pretty much the most boring and maybe more of a meme than anything. But in a weird way, it almost feels like this is the one that might be the most likely for Blizzard to make. And that is a Warlord Zul'jin for 5 mana that reads, your spells have lifesteal. So everyone has been clamoring forever for Hunter to get healing. There's very little healing in Hunter. Rexar can provide some via lifesteal, zombies, etc. But as a part of just a reliable game plan, Hunter can't gain life. And a lot of people wish they could, so that suddenly Control Hunter would become a viable archetype. And if all of your spells had lifesteal, Control Hunter would be a lot easier to play. Because imagine things like Explosive Shot suddenly healing you for 9 health, not just clearing the board. You increase your survivability tenfold as long as you built your deck to support it. And of course, if you're committing a 5 mana play like this Warlord Zul'jin without actually developing minions, you're going to need your deck to have enough spells to stay alive and enough spells to feed into this permanent effect. And, a spell hunter build might be perfect for that. For instance, imagine an explosive trap going off against a board of tiny minions and healing you for like 1,000,000 health. That sounds unbelievable. So clearly this would give you all of that. Now, to give a hero power here, I didn't want this hero power to be super strong because I think the lifesteal aspect is just adding up to a ton of value over time. So I made a hero power here that is hilarious, first off, because it's called Disarm, and Zul'jin is missing his left arm. For those of you that don't know, he lost his arm in, I don't remember, but in the lore, he lost an arm and an eye. And not to make light of amputees by any means, but I thought it would be a cute idea if he could only attack the rightmost minion with his throwing axe because he's missing his left arm. So it would deal 4 damage to the rightmost enemy minion on the board. So it would just give you a reliable way to chip away at your opponent's board. It would often kill things in smaller, more aggressive decks. Would not kill big things, but your opponent could position around it carefully and play around it. But I think it's fair that this hero power is a bit awkward to use and not the most powerful long-term effect, simply because I think the lifesteal aspect would be very strong if the deck was built to support it. It'd make this a really powerful swing and stabilization card. And for Disarm's sake, it's fine that it's a low power level. That's by design. So don't be surprised that it's so weak. I want it to be. And also, it's just kind of a cute idea. So I don't know that this is the best design I've ever made. It's rather simple in its execution, but it addresses a gap that Hunters had for a long time. And frankly, we might just see something like this. Trolls are known for having regeneration and having some mystical stuff like I talked about in the previous example. So Blizzard might just go this route and give Hunters some healing that has long been asked for. Zul'jin could be a way to make that work. And then finally, for my 5th hero card design, this one might look a little bit familiar if you caught my previous video where I talked about the different troll champion cards. I, of course, addressed a Zul'jin design in that video. There's been a lot more in this video, but I wanted to include this one again, just in case you missed the last video. I'm not going to talk about it a lot, but essentially with this card, it's all about balancing risk and reward, where the lower your health total climbs, the more powerful your hero power becomes. So you create some really interesting situations in game where you put yourself in mortal danger to potentially get a high roll opportunity off of your hero power and, either kill your opponent or make some big swingy plays or threaten them in return. But managing your health total between you and your opponent, taking damage intentionally, all of that becomes a really fun element with this card and really does, again, harken back to that Berserker style of play, particularly like Heroes of the Storm, where you, with Zul'jin, if you can go down to 1 health and stay alive for a few seconds and do a ton of damage. That's exactly what this card does, except it does it in Hearthstone. So although some people are worried about the potential for this hero power to do silly stuff with Clockwork Automaton, remember that that's often still up to your opponent what's possible, how much damage they do and the game plan they play. It's a hero power that's very weak if your opponent doesn't damage you. So it's not always good, and that backfire potential and that risk-reward balance, I think, is still there with Warlord Zul'jin. So I'm happy with this design, and I'll let you watch the previous video if you want a more in-depth discussion. That was called the predicting the troll champions for Rastakhan's Rumble. But for now, I'll just let you sort this one out in your brain with a little bit of commentary. And let me know what you think in the comments if you didn't get to last time around. So all that said, guys, those are my 5 designs for Warlord Zul'jin, the new Rastakhan's Rumble Hunter hero card. Little surprised in general, Hunter is the class that got the hero card. I thought Deathstalker Rexxar was making a big impact. Although if you think back, a year ago or so when this expansion was probably being planned out and the cards were being designed, I don't know that Rexxar was as influential back then as he is today. Took a while for Rexxar to really see the levels of play that we see now because things like Death Rattle Hunter and Secret Hunter hadn't popped up on the scene quite as much, that both prominently use Rexar, and the meta just wasn't quite as good of a fit. So maybe that's part of the reason Blizzard was a little bit slow to recognize the lack of a need for a Hunter hero card right now. But nonetheless, I think Zul'jin's a great character and will create awesome opportunities to have a hero card moving forward through the standard format rotation once we lose Rexar. So I'm still very excited to see what the actual card ends up looking like, and if at all it captures anything we designed here in these 5 cards. That said, of course, if you guys have thoughts, questions, all of that good stuff, you can leave that in the comments below. But until then, thank you so very much for watching, and until next time, game on.